Let me introduce you to my chief of staff and campaign manager.
Right.
We're clear to engage. Time on target. 5 mics. Out.
Welcome back to Crosstabs with Brian Iverson and Reagan Knope. Today, part of our interview series, we've had a handful of prestigious guests, and today is no different. We have Senator Dick Anderson. He is an Oregon State Senator representing Senate District 5, hopefully, because I didn't look it up before we started. But good, my legislative brain is still active. Welcome, Senator Anderson.
Well, thank you, Reagan. I appreciate it. And yes, your brain's working. Senate District 5.
They didn't change the numbers during redistricting, so he was able to keep his number, unlike Vicky, who went from 55. So it was kind of fun because you had like 5 and 55, and now she's 59. So he did get to keep Senate District 5. And we're going to keep it again, Reagan, I think.
Look at that, Brian Iverson. Brian, we didn't come to interview you today, but you are also chief strategist and chief of staff for Senator Dick Anderson, aren't you?
I am, yeah. I really enjoy working for the senator. It's been become a really good friendship, I think, even more so than anything else. We've become pretty good friends over the years, and we got to work together during the COVID election of 2020 together, and that was quite interesting as we run a campaign when you're like, well, what do we do now? And we're like, I don't know. What do you run? What do you do? I guess you make phone calls. So a lot of phone calls we made, didn't we, Senator, in 2020?
We did. We burned up those lines, and my voice got heard by many folk, either on voicemail or in person. And but Reagan, Brian's modest because really the only reason he's now here, in 24 is because he promised to handle the campaign of my granddaughter in her senior year of class, which is coming up, and to be president of the senior class at Wilsonville. And so I just mentioned that since he was doing that anyway, he might as well take on this campaign as well.
Perfect. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Reagan,
Brian,
a senior class president in Wilsonville School District run by Republican consultants. It could be a challenge. I'm just saying I might have to do some fundraising and bring in the big dogs for this one. We'll get a hold of Senator Woods and see if we can get an endorsement out of him.
Well, we're waiting to see how it goes with that particular race, but a closer, more a race for probably our listeners more so would be the upcoming election. And August, I don't know. Brian, you tell me if it's early for TV, but you guys are ready. You've got, I think, 3 TV ads. I saw 2 of them, and then I was just on your YouTube channel, Iverson Media, and you can see 3 different ads for Senator Anderson. But the main one that I think is going to interest people, especially, is Senator Anderson delivers for his district. And you talk about how Dick Anderson has delivered for the coast. That was his goal, was to make sure that the coast was represented, not being pushed to the side in favor of Portland and Eugene and Salem. And you advocate for keeping more of your hard-earned money.
I'm Senator Dick Anderson. 4 years ago, I made a promise to be a strong voice for our rural communities and the coast, because urban politicians have overlooked us for way too long. Today, we have a place at the table, and I'm proud to say we've accomplished a lot.
In Salem, Senator Anderson is considered one of the most effective state senators, from tackling critical issues like affordable housing and health care to addressing key needs like child care. Senator Anderson has delivered big for our rural and coastal communities. Senator Anderson stood firm on taxes, ensuring working people keep more of the money they earn by blocking new taxes and protecting your kicker refund.
Balance in Oregon started when I was elected 4 years ago. Join me on my campaign, and we'll keep finding positive solutions.
Senator Dick Anderson's leadership that's working. Paid for by Anderson for Oregon, PAC ID 20255.
Maybe you can share a little bit, Senator, about why that's in your TV ad and why that's what you're running on. You're running on your record, which can be a difficult thing sometimes for an incumbent.
Well, it can, Megan, and thank you. And actually, in my case, I have nothing to apologize for my record, and it's a nice switch to be an incumbent, and so I can point to a great deal. But you hit on it real well. The reason I ran in 20 was to give a louder voice to the coast and and resources. So with a voice comes and attention comes resources. And I think, quite honestly, that's happened. I have two good representatives in the Senate district. Both of them are also strong supporters of the coast. And as a result, communities and the citizenry have certainly benefited up and down the coast of our actions. And, there's another component too. Even the Coastal Caucus has switched in 2020 to a stronger red color. And, it's made a big difference on the attention for the coast.
I think the Coastal Caucus is a really, really good indicator of why the coast has become, loud. I mean, you've obviously been a big part of that, but that switch from 1 to 7, 1 Republican, 7 Democrats to 7 Republicans, 1 Democrat is pretty dramatic, especially in the short time period in which it happened. But also I would say that you guys were pretty respectful before. When it was 1-7, you were unified as a Coastal Caucus, but when you're in the minority and you're unified by party and you're unified by the coast, I think it kind of made you guys it elevated you a little bit more to the point of like, hey, the coast is changing. It changed, right? We said it wasn't working this other way, so we're going to vote Republican, which clearly happened. And I think that the Democrats are the majority party at the time, and you've got to throw Representative Gomberg in there as well. That has been a loud voice for the Coastal Caucus, has truly made a difference. And I think you can see it in the building, and it's really happened with policy too.
I would agree. I think we get along, and we pick and choose what we will endorse. And quite frankly, the name doesn't go on the endorsement unless all of us agree. So that keeps us out of one individual's ego or attention, and it's much more oriented for the community, and in this case, the entire coast. So I definitely
politicians don't have any egos, so that's crazy.
I'm learning. I'm learning that. I'm learning.
Well, speaking of egos, we're going to pump up Senator Anderson's just a little bit. You are the vice chair of the Senate Housing Committee. And last session, really these last 2 sessions, the long and the short session, very housing focused session. Do you want to give us just a quick, maybe cover quickly legislation that passed that you think is important to housing and what may needs to still be done in order to help with the housing crisis that we still have in the state?
Yeah. Going to the 23 long session, new governor, really seemed to be willing to put housing on the map, created some emergency clauses and actually formed the housing Production Advisory Council, some 25 individuals with housing, backgrounds and influence, including actually some legislators, I being one of them. And, in essence, charged us with coming together with recommendations for her that would help in the production of housing. And she set a goal of some 36,000 units to be built, when Oregon currently is producing at a 20,000 level. So one can see there's a huge gap in between. So, for me, that said somebody's interested. If we can get beyond just the name and just a group, if it really does something, and it did. It put forth 59 different recommendations to the governor, and I think you'll see those working through as we go forward. And that rolled into 24th session, the short session, with her one bill. The governor put forth only one bill in the entire session, and that's kind of unusual. And it was a housing bill. Now, granted, it had a lot of sub chapters in it, but and it was a big bill, but still. And for me, she finally is emphasizing the need for production rather than just in words, but in actions. And that's a significant, because going back to 23, we put a lot of money, the legislature did, to shelters and operations and rent relief and, all the kind of certainly humane needed pieces, but they didn't produce any housing. And, we need to get to that level where our system supports a 36,000 unit a year in new production. And, finally, in her bill, there were a couple of instances. One, a push into land use, allowing cities with lots of criteria to advance some land into their urban growth boundaries under certain conditions at a faster pace, and a significant revolving loan fund where cities, again, loving the idea of pushing responsibility down to cities for housing needs, could in essence borrow money from the state, pay it back through increased property assessed value. And so it's a fund that should continue to evolve and be sustainable and get away from the general fund. So, I think there's a lot of action. There's really more action needed, and that's around the whole idea of producing, more houses at all levels, both rental and ownership, not just rental, not just affordable. We've pushed into what's called workforce housing, which is roughly 80 to 120% median income. And that's
what's that in real dollars, Senator? You always say that all the time, 80 to 120%. And I always keep meaning to ask you, is that like 50 grand a year, 60 grand a year? Do you know?
I don't, because it varies.
The area is different, right? Each
right, exactly. And to your question, that's one of the areas that I think we have to look at seriously is 120% in a coastal community, for example, heavily integrated with service sector folks. Now they're above minimum wage by far, but yet the housing price, 120% of median income of a small number still doesn't allow you to buy, a medium priced home in Lincoln County or Coos County, where prices have gone, sky high. So I think, we need some adjustments there and some thinking about that.
Because I always equate that to when, I don't know, growing up, or I can't kind of remember when, and you were in finance for 35 years, so you would know this. Didn't they always say like you could afford a house like 5 times your annual income, right? That was kind of like the number. You didn't want to really go above that because that just got outside of your means of paying 20-25% of whatever your gross income. So if you do the math, if it's 50 grand, that's only a $250,000 house. And I haven't seen many of those on the market, especially in Lincoln County.
Well, the other equation too is, 30% of your gross monthly income, in essence, could be going to housing, whether it's rental or home ownership.
Yeah.
And then you back that into, what's that in relationship for rent example, as an example, and, a payment, mortgage payment. So there's different ratios that lenders use and landlords use and the federal government uses.
Yeah. And then with just kind of going back in, I think it's just for context, because in long session, there was a Housing Bill 23 long session that wasn't interrupted by the walkout. We had, everybody was back in time to pass that housing bill, and not to throw our Democrat friends under the bus, but they didn't pass it. That's the reality. It failed in the Senate, and then the governor did some more work, I think, to your point, with the 59 recommendations, and just had this short session bill. And we ended up getting that one over the finish line. I think you, and as well as both the housing chairs in the Senate and the House, should take some credit too, because the Democrats were partners on this one for sure and got it over the finish line. But we always talk about, okay, you got all the shelter stuff kind of handled, right? I mean, we kind of went after the Band-Aid stuff first, right? You got to get the people off the streets and then you've really talked about production, and you said earlier 36,000 units, and we're at 20,000 units. I don't know how we bridge 16,000. That's almost double the production of housing that we're doing today. Do you know, do you see a path of how to get there with the current framework at all?
Not with our current framework, and that's you're exactly right. One, the system that we're currently under will not carry that process, and you could add a lot of people to it, and that's kind of where people have started talking. I'm not there, and don't think we should go there. I think it's an opportune time to you look at our process and shorten it up. I like to remind everybody, including the governor, that we're in a crisis. She's declared a crisis for housing, all types. However, it still doesn't feel like we are acting that it's a crisis. We're not taking short steps. We're not, moving quickly. We're not eliminating unnecessary, duplication, to meet that goal. And that's what I would like to see. And back to, the Housing Advisory Group, they worked in 5 different work areas. One is workforce. Who's going to build these things? We don't have a workforce that is able to spin out 36,000 units to begin with, because we've been lax in that. The other is land use. We don't have the supply of land available, ready with infrastructure inside the urban growth boundaries. The process, that we were just talking about, I hear stories of different metropolitan areas of 180 days to get a permit is just ludicrous, or longer. And then even building codes, what we're requiring, of folks, building. And the 5th is finance. Finding, better ways of financing, especially affordable arena. And as we were talking about workforce, which typically doesn't get a subsidy, the developers are able to do it by shortening up the time, which time is money, and that by itself can help generate, lower priced units.
Well, I mean, Brian, you had brought up in our meeting before, which listeners won't be able to hear, but I'm still going to give you credit for it anyway.
Thanks.
Kamala Harris proposing, Vice President Harris proposing a $25,000 down payment assistance program of some kind. That doesn't solve a shortage of units. So that'll be helpful in states like Arizona. And even I just visited Colorado. They're building everywhere they can. There was a part of Colorado Springs I was driving on the edge of, where they're building out the suburbs there. And on one side of the pretty fast moving freeway was, I think 2 giant Amazon delivery centers, I'm assuming that are servicing Colorado Springs. The other side, as many homes, single family homes as they could pack in to the space. It was incredible to see. And you just see so few of those developments in Oregon. And I think that overall, down payment assistance might be a good idea. Not sure that the federal government has the money to do it right now with the current deficits they're running, but let's pretend they did have the money. Is that going to that's not going to help in Oregon when you don't have supply?
You're exactly right, Craig. And then you just hit on one of the pieces that I love to, when we're talking about housing, remind the audience that in Oregon, half the people just hate sprawl that you just described. Whether it's Las Vegas or LA or Phoenix, they envision just massive housings out through the desert or whatever. And the other half hate density. So you start putting those groups together, and you wonder how we ever move ahead. And quite frankly, we haven't. Is the problem. But
Yeah, John Kitzhofer once was quoted as saying the only thing Oregonians hate more than sprawl is density.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's funny because that doesn't give you anywhere to go.
Right.
Except for, I guess maybe the Democrats who voted against the housing bill, who voted against, fixing our land use laws to be a little bit more permissive to allow more buildable lands. It's not like we're throwing them out, but we do need to make adjustments because they've been so anti-production. They've really slowed things down. But maybe maybe they don't want a border wall on the southern border, but they do want a border wall in Oregon because they don't want anyone to move here.
Yeah.
I think, well, you're hitting it on a little. Well, one, there was a realtor study they did last year, I think after long session, and they presented it during short session. I think we touched on it. It was like 74% or roughly 3/4 of Oregonians want a single family detached home. So, right, the white picket fence, American dream kind of stuff. And as much as Kamala Harris, I mean, Democrats, in general, love to throw money at problems. That usually tends to be the solution to everything, right? Just to throw a government program at it, which Ronald Reagan, Reagan, is that your favorite president? I think it's your favorite president. I don't know. I'm going to go with
my favorite president is Jimmy Carter, actually. He did an incredible job. He's the best one-term president ever. I know most people think that's Joe Biden. He's second on the list. Jimmy Carter, the greatest president ever.
He's got to finish before they come out with a new list. But Reagan said, didn't Reagan say that? He says, the worst 9 words in the English language is "I'm here from the government and I'm here to help" or something like that. And that's just what I hear when I hear the down payment stuff. I'm like, that's not going to solve the problem.
And the closest thing we have to eternal life on this earth is a government program. That's the other thing he said. So you combine those two, and it's a challenge. Yeah.
And the interesting part of this whole housing discussion is it really should be nonpartisan. Everybody, would like a stable, affordable, house, whether it's rental or ownership, but stable housing and something other than a blue tarp. I'd like to add, because that just doesn't fit in very well. And in my case, is the bill that Brian brought up. I actually carried that bill 3414 on the Senate floor. So here's a Republican senator, not only voting for it, but carrying it, and had worked the floor trying to get, Democratic friends to vote for what Oregonians need. And yet, it died by one vote on the Senate floor. So really shameful.
It was such a bummer. I think when we get to the policy, and there's some things that I think government can do. I think the revolving loan fund was kind of a new idea that came out of, and I think we shaped it and sculpted it a little bit in short session, but I think it's got a promising idea, but it doesn't solve the 16,000 gap right away. And I think that's what we try to get at, is that the quickest way to solve it, at least And if somebody's got a better idea, down payment assistance is not going to solve it. That's for dang sure. Because all that does is basically artificially inflate the price of homes.
Right.
So if you've already got a burgeoning demand with not enough supply, you got to get on the supply side. And until we get on the supply side, we're just going to have rising prices, more demand. And then if our interest rates come down, then all that will do is drive more demand. So I think there's a lot more to work to do here. I know that Democrats hate the word, expanding the urban growth boundary, but unless there's a better way, you got to put more land in the mix, because land is the one price that, that's a very spongible, movable scenario.
You were asking what else we might do. I guess I can't help but think of how we've handled, in essence, other crises. And somehow we've got to get the agencies involved and thinking as well that their actions, could somehow benefit housing or ought to somehow shape it. And I go to transportation, for example, ODOT. At least in my area on the coast here, 101 is a huge barrier between east and west. Usually on the west side of 101, you've got the ocean. Not a lot of expansion there, and then the east side, is hills, not expansion there. But there's often unrecognized barriers in transportation, such as the cost of streetlights, for example. You think of what a developer, given traffic counts, to develop a piece of property off 101, because of the traffic count that project might and would generate, a streetlight's got to be put in, on 101. And those are expensive. And the developer generally has to pay for those. So, I would, I'm trying to think of some of the other areas where we had equality and DEI aspects, asking the agencies to keep that in mind. Somehow we need to have agencies keep in mind the negative, or they could come up with positive impacts for housing development.
You hit the nail on the head there, and I think you must have stole my notes, because the next thing I was going to ask you about was, does transportation fit into housing, and how might the transportation package that's coming in 2025? The idea is the legislature is going to put together a big transportation package in 2025. And are there ways that, as you said, you've got the ocean on one side of 101. If you have the ocean on the east side of 101, you got a huge problem. That's no good.
There's a few spots,
for those
not
who
many,
are...
but there's a few spots.
But transportation is going to be a key issue. So maybe there's a way to do housing that isn't just housing. It's going to be transportation, right?
It is. And, we, again, going back to my, local government, city government roles, and trying to meet housing needs, especially in the affordable range, we place affordable housing, or that are income restricted, that are lower income, inside cities, so that people knowingly can walk to resources rather than having to take their car and everything else, because cars are expensive, use of, and all this kind of stuff. So, making it, we don't make it easy enough by any means for developers to find those properties and then develop them at an affordable price. Transportation, roads, infrastructure has a big impact.
You were telling me the other day about, I think it's the city of Florence, right? Where they had that,
right.
They have property, they're ready to go. What was that deal with the transportation?
Well, it was that was the one with, it's The city's already done traffic counts up and down 101 in its urban growth boundary. And there's land, flat land and developable land off 101, but, it's zoned for housing. But the developer, if he builds or suggests housing, that traffic count will generate the need for a stoplight on Highway 101. And, that moves that project right into market rate and probably above market rate, just because the developer has to pay for, a traffic light. That's a couple $100,000. Hard to believe, but traffic lights are expensive.
So if you're developing 20 homes,
Yeah.
and you got to pay a couple $100,000 on top of that, now each home price just went up $10,000.
Right. Yeah.
And that's just for the cost of that traffic light. That's something to take a look. So I wonder, when we look at the 2025 transportation package, and we're in an emergency in housing, we're in a crisis.
Right. Yep.
We're not in a transportation crisis. We're in a housing crisis. So maybe some of the transportation dollars or solutions might be tied to a crisis, not necessarily in somebody who's need. So, or on 101's case, if they did the traffic count, Senator, in November, it would be fine.
Well, that's true.
So as long as people live there only from October to like April, is that then we're okay. No need for traffic lights.
Well, you're not helping my mission of diversifying the economy and encouraging economic development. So thank you for that thought, but keep it to yourself.
Now, Senator, I know that you are the former mayor of Lincoln City, but another town in your district, Newport, which is a little in Albany. So I get over to Newport more often, probably 5 to 10 times a year. And my favorite restaurant there is Chowder Bowl. This is not sponsored unless they want to sponsor, but the Chowder Bowl. And I love going there, especially in the non-peak times, because during peak times, man, you could be waiting an hour and a half to sit down. But especially in the fall, winter, springtime, even when it's really cold or rainy, man, you get right in there, and they've got fantastic fish tacos. I love those. So would definitely encourage people to go to Senator Anderson's
Reagan,
district.
I go there. I go to Chowder Bowl all the time with a senator, and we right up to the front of the line. I mean, even in July, I think you're just going with the wrong people.
I don't think I'm coastal. I'm probably not coastal. Coastal elite, Brian, is what you are there.
Oh.
I guess I'm not a coastal elite. I guess you are. So maybe you'll bring me sometime. You haven't offered yet, but maybe sometime. We'll see.
Yeah.
$20 bill.
Senator, I do have one thought for you, advice that I have, and this is free. Brian would charge you for this. I'm not going to. If you get a chance to talk about transportation next session, you should, because there's a lot of, I think, legislators that'll be new. There'll be some that haven't dealt with transportation, and now everybody's sort of dealing with it. You can give them Transportation 101 using Highway 101. So there you go. That's free right there for you. You can use that.
Are you saying that Senator Anderson should be the co-chair of transportation, or maybe the co-vice chair? I think that sounds like a decent pitch.
I was right here just trying to be all subtle, and Brian's just blurting it right out there.
Yeah.
This is why I get paid the big dollars.
That's right. That's right. Oh, goodness. Well, do you have any other topics that you want to cover, Senator, before we let you go? I know you've been really generous with your time.
I do actually. I want to remind you that the Port of Coos Bay is also in my district.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about economic development and potential. There's an asset sitting in quasi limbo that has all sorts of capabilities, and we're working hard. I'm working hard on generating support by the state for that port. It's one of the 2 international ports in Oregon. The port of Portland is the other one, and they've got on the hook a group for container operation, and it's moving ahead. Has real potential not only for jobs during construction, but also ongoing jobs, but also a way to get, talking about transportation and stuff, trucks off the road. It's a railroad line into Eugene that could take material to Eugene to be on other rail lines and shipped all over the country. So a lot of good things are happening right now.
Your timing on bringing that up is good too, because the Port of Portland, this was making me crazy. I saw this morning on Twitter. The Port of Portland just opened up their brand new airport. I don't know what they call the area. It's not like the terminals, but it's the big open space where all the shops are and everything like that. I think it's right as you come through, and I think they have brand new
terminals.
TSA. Yeah, new terminal. You're right. And it looks beautiful. All this wood. I saw a hilarious tweet where somebody was like, yeah, all of us advocates of, I don't know, making things look like timber, we're, being represented here, which I'm just like, it's always about being represented. But and not that I have anything against the timber stuff. I'm sure the products that were put in there were good. Hopefully they were in companies, but they spent all this money on this terminal, and they're also going to the legislature asking for a bailout of their poorly running Terminal 6. And we could divert more of that container traffic and all of that commerce to Coos Bay, as you're pointing out, Senator. So maybe you'll have the opportunity to make that case here. Or maybe it sounds like you're already making that case, and more people need to be making that case. So it'd be great, I think, for more elected officials, local, statewide, and legislative, to understand that Coos Bay Port is available and it should be used, and it can, at the very least, relieve some of the backlog in Portland. But of course, we know that you're fighting hard against what always happens in Salem with the one-party control, is they always seem to bail out something in Portland.
Right.
I think there's some more, don't we have? I think Val Hoyle's been pretty vocal on this issue with the port, and I think even Senator Merkley. So it feels like, because I know people in Coos Bay have probably been like, oh, been there, done that, with the Coos Bay stuff. But this time being down there, talking to kind of the port folks, I think seeing some more developer interest, some more money going towards it. It just feels like this time, there's some momentum there that I think might actually catch fire, and it can really change the stripes of a community to get something like that in Coos Bay, which would be really huge for that community.
Yeah, it really would, and it's been hard hit area of Oregon for sure, and this would be a knife, much more than just a lifesaver. It would be a real kick in the pants for a growing economy, and it's not just for Coos Bay. The whole Oregon, benefits, from this kind of operation. So if we could think big enough and be willing to, make the limited risk, I think makes a lot of sense.
And I think if you get that traffic out of the Port of Portland a little bit, some of that truck traffic, and now you're bringing it, obviously it's leaving Eugene. So there are trucks that you're taking, all those trucks that are going further south of Eugene, or not all, but I say a lot of them, they're now leaving Eugene. So you're taking all of that congested traffic off of the I-5, and then maybe some of that stuff that's going east of Eugene, it can head east to Eugene from there. I think there's some viable scenarios there with that container traffic. And then that's usually just the driver, right? That's the beginning. And then it's all the other things that come along with it. And when you got to get that anchor, it's like having an anchor store, right? When you're developing a commercial mall, right, you got to have the anchor store, and then you get all the other little stores around it that, feed into and supply and make things happen around that anchor store. And that's kind of what Coos Bay is really trying to do here.
And, Brian, oftentimes I think people just think of container operations as import, but certainly the exporting of Oregon products, are traveling by truck now to, sometimes to the port of Portland, but up to Tacoma or across the country. And by coming to Coos Bay, it again saves that wear and tear on highways and the burning fossil fuels and all that kind of stuff.
Well, let's not get too crazy talking about. Well, I don't know if will the ships be able to navigate the wind turbines off the coast as they come in? Will that be a viable scenario? I won't get into the weeds there. I'll leave that one alone.
Okay, thank you.
Hopefully those ships have navigation systems, Reagan. I think they should be able to make it around those wind turbines, but I think the senator might be playing around with that one. We need to slow down a little bit on those wind turbines anyways and have a better scenario before we move forward. But this one is, to me, is just a no-brainer. Like the tracks are already, not like we got to build new tracks to Eugene. There's a couple tunnel improvements and a few things, but it's all right there. It's low-hanging fruit. And the biggest thing that we've always pushed with the state of Oregon, if you create jobs, you create state revenue, because we're very driven by our income tax in Oregon. And so all you have to do is invest in job driving, businesses, and you're going to drive state revenue, which ultimately helps everybody down the road. I think, and Coos Bay's got there's a lot of room for housing in Coos Bay. I think in North Bend, in that area, I think there's some, flatter land, as they say on the coast.
Yeah. Yes, they're poised to add to that 36,000 a year. That's what we're trying to do. I hate going back to housing, but all the communities are participating, because we asked them as the legislature to be part of the solution, and they're stepping up to the most part. And certainly Coos Bay, North Bend, that whole area there.
Yeah. Well, Senator Anderson, it was a pleasure having you on today. I really do appreciate it. I enjoy hearing your thoughts on housing and all the things that happen in Oregon. I know Reagan probably learned a little, because he's smarter than most. But even though, because Tim was on housing too, we should remind, Senator Tim Knopp did sit on the housing committee. I'm pretty sure you had to tell him how to vote every time and stuff to, make sure. But he was there, and he was always a willing partner. His ability of understanding, obviously, the building industry, being the builder's executive vice president. I think we just had a lightning strike committee that worked really well. Chair Jama was actually a very willing partner with you. I know you guys have become pretty good friends, and hopefully that continues going forward.
It should. And I do have to caution you not to be criticizing my fellow senators on the housing committee. They were a good team, including Senator Knopp. So I was pleased to have all of them there, and we all learned something. I think a good, especially like during legislative days or whatnot, where we could have informational hearings and kind of increase everybody's learning curve on the challenges. So
good.
It worked well. Yes.
My dad and I last night were just talking about how, if you want him to work on housing and building policy, you're in better shape than if you actually want him to come renovate your house. Because he had his license for a while, but let me tell you, we did some of that work together, and we knew demo, and then it gets sketchy after that, honestly. We had to have some of those professionals come in. So better he is off representing the building industry than he is doing anything in the building industry. I think.
I went through, our water was off this morning. We're on a well out on the ranch. And so Vicky comes downstairs and she's like, Brian, the water doesn't work. I go, well, the hot water works. There's a little bit left in the hot water tank. Well, are you going to go out and fix it? And I go, well, eventually I'll go outside. I go, but I don't know. Did you look does my shirt say water guy on the side? 'Cause I don't. What do you want me to go? Do I dive down into the well? Like I don't know. I mean, I love the fact that she thinks I could just go outside and magically fix the well, right? And it was so funny because she comes about a half hour. I sat there for another half hour and drank some coffee and probably worked on emails like most people do in the morning. And then I went outside and I geared up and then I went through all of my checks. And then she yells outside about a half hour later, "Hey, it's working now. What did you do?" I go, "Oh, yeah, I found the problem." I have no idea. I have zero idea what I did. I turned stuff, I changed stuff, and it worked. I don't know what's going on. You flip the switch, you kick the computer a little bit, and something happened. So now I'm a water guy. So I'm gonna add that to my repertoire.
Exactly how we fix stuff out there on the here on my farm smaller than ranch, I think, right, in terms of size. Let's see if I can put another screw in it, if that helps.
It's so true.
Well,
on the coast, right? I know the senator always tells me, it's always sunny on the coast, and they never have any water problems out there because it's tons of it. The problem is it just doesn't taste very good.
Now, all day yesterday, I was walking some watersheds for, the city of Reedsport. So, I'm into surface water too. So it's a hot issue.
Oh boy. Oh, how
well,
is it? Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. Again, this is Senator Dick Anderson. If you want to find out more about him, he's on the campaign trail right now. So you should head to senatoranderson.com. We're going to link those good-looking TV ads in our show notes for this episode. But yeah, that on his website, you can get in contact with him, find his social media, all of that good stuff is on there. You can, of course, follow Brian Iverson at Brian G. Iverson on Twitter. I'm at Reagan Canope on Twitter. The podcast is at Crosstabs FM on Twitter. And crosstabs.studio is where you can find us. And also just search Crosstabs on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget to subscribe and follow. Thanks so much for being with us, Senator Anderson.
Thank you both. Appreciate the invite.